Hi folks, this is Theory of Visualization chapter. Here we're going to talk about some rules about how we achieve graphical excellence and integrity in our visualizations. This chapter is mainly focused on the principles laid out by Edward Tufte. And Edward Tufte is an important figure who criticized most of the visualizations that were used over the years, and especially in journalism field. So he says that there are three important elements for design excellence. So a well-designed presentation of data requires substance. Your data must be good. It requires statistics. You have to have good statistics, and then you have to have good design. He has two principles, and of course, before I get to the principles, he has 4 books on the field, and all these books have been bestsellers, and he publishes them himself. So the first one is the second edition of The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. Actually, this book is called, this is the book that I actually highly recommended to you. It's called The Bible of Visualization. So I'll definitely recommend that you acquire a copy of this. I think it's about $30–40. It's not much, and it's definitely worth it. He has 3 other books, but I think the first book for our purposes will most likely be enough. But of course, you should definitely inquire about others as well after this course is complete. Now, Tufte has 2 main lessons. He has lessons for practice and lessons for theory. So in terms of practice, he says graphical integrity and excellence are important. We're going to define both of these terms and give you some examples of how we achieve both excellence and integrity. He has a lot of principles on these, and very simple rules that are easily followed. And most of the tools these days already implemented some of his integrity and excellence principles. However, including Excel, there are tools that actually do not kind of violate these principles, and I'll show you some examples, especially with Excel. Now, the theory part, he talks about principles for data graphics. This part I'm not going to focus too much. I have some examples, but I'm going to focus mainly on excellence and integrity. Now, what is graphical integrity? It's very simple. Earlier in the previous chapter introduction, I said, do not lie with your data. Right? Thou shalt not bear false witness to thy data. So that was very important. So basically, graphical integrity means that. Of course, it kind of elaborates on this a little bit more. It says you need to have really labeling so that the graphic is very clear and you do not really distort or create ambiguity in your graph. Okay? So you clearly mark what is on the graphic that you're given. Numbers, should be actual numbers that you have in your data, should be represented on the graphic itself, whatever visualization you use, and they should be proportional. So one number versus another number should not be disproportional when they get on the graph. And we'll show you where these disproportions may arise and how to avoid them. And then finally, it says show variation in your data, not in the design. And we'll see some examples there. We'll say, okay, design should not cheat, and we'll show you some examples of that. All right, let's see. Now, look at this graph. This is an example from Tufte's book. And in this example, if you notice, look at the revenue figures. Take some time and then just explore these figures. Look at the numbers and the height of these bars. So, operating revenues, net income, exploration, development expenditures. This is really a bizarre graphic. Couple of things. Look at the height of this. This is 3.5 million. And this is supposed to be 7. You see the difference? There's only 30% difference, but almost double the amount. Same thing around here, it's even worse. Look at these numbers, and then look at this number. This is minus $11,000, minus, negative number, and it's as high as 3.5 million over here. So this graphic is totally a mess. Look at 75,000 right here. Look at 329. So whoever created this graphic had no idea about integrity. He didn't care about it. He didn't really. I mean, this is just a hodgepodge of numbers put together, and there's a picture behind, of course, mining, I think, employees working there. But overall, this is a terrible graph. Okay. Now, look at this now. And this, you recently see it. I actually saw it just today. Somebody had a graph like this. Actually, while you look at this graph, I'm actually going to go ahead and find that for you. Here is the chart. As you know, the stock market is not doing very well recently. Here is a drop. Look at this drop. It's very hard to see even. Look at the drop. Stock market dropped from 28,000 to 22,000 within a month. Okay, so this is just in 1 month. And you look at this on the graph itself, it's almost like started from top and dropped to zero. I mean, it looks like zero, but this is 22,000. Same issue. This faces a lot. I mean, we see this all the time with magazines, newspapers. Look at the stock market. What is this? Look at the scale. Exact same issue. So here is the y-axis. It doesn't start from zero. This is called y. I think I mentioned this last time, axis truncation. It makes you believe that stock market tanked right here drastically. It went from whatever number it was, 500, all the way down to zero. It makes you feel like that, but it's not. It actually went down only maybe 10%. Yeah, just about 10%, less than 10%. Okay, so we call these scale distortions, and y-axis truncation is one of them, especially in the two-dimensional example. These are some things that we want to avoid. This is actually what that entire scale, when you saw the entire scale, this is exactly what it should look like. You can see there is really not a drastic drop. It is drop, yes, but not a drastic one. Okay. And if you show it in the entire context, not just the, few years, you can actually see that this is really not that big of a deal. It's a deal, of course, but not a huge deal. Okay, show it in the entire context. Don't hide your data. Don't focus on certain part. Don't truncate things. If they change your result, they change how your visualization is perceived and how it's processed in people's mind. Okay, don't lie. William Playfair, we talked about this. He actually also had most of his charts were landscape. There is only one portrait chart, and this is that chart. And in his report, that I think it was a book published, there's many charts, but this is one of them. And here you can actually see the scale distortion. So if you look at this, this is the problem here is the height versus the width. This is not proportional. There's something called a golden ratio. So the golden ratio is around 1.6 something. Okay, so this is basically a figure should have golden ratio. So that means if this is 1.6, this should be 1. Okay, so in golden ratio we see it a lot in nature, and this is kind of what we perceive as humans. So this scale distortion shows you as if there is a drastic increase. I can change this easily and make it expand on the width, and you can see that this increase is really not that drastic. Actually, you go from, you look at this number, this is 10 and this is 200, I can see 250. So here you have 140 to 250, but look at the increase, it's very steep. Okay, it looks very steep, but it's really, of course, his goal was to show that the national debt was very high, and he was trying to, ask the government not to get debt to, sponsor or pay for the wars in colonial wars, and part of those colonial wars, as you may know, happened in the soil that we are in now. This was the colonial wars against Britain in the United States. Okay. Now, so here is actually, for fairness, he actually had another figure, not the exact figure and not the equivalent, but it's another figure in the right kind of proportions. Okay. Now, here is this example. What Edward Tufte did was he tried to quantify these distortions. He came up with something called a lie factor. So let's look at this figure. I want you to spend some time, look at this. What do you see? So it shows you the fuel economy standards for autos. So what is the average expected fuel mileage, MPG, should each car manufacturer achieve? So you look at the standard, starts from 18, goes up to 19 in 79, all the way to 27.5 in 85. What do you see? If you look at this line, this is 27, and this is supposed to be 18, right? So let's look at it. I should do this. So let's make this, first of all, I'm going to change the color here. Let me make this red. And let's move it. Right, so this is 18. Here is my 18. And here is my 27.5. Okay. You see the distortion? This is what we call a big lie. How do we measure this lie? So the lie is easy to measure. So actually, if you look at these two values, so the first line is 0.6 inches long, the other line is 5.3 inches long. So as you can see, it's almost like tenfold. At the same time, the 18 versus 27, not even double. Okay, so we can actually measure this lie, and we're going to do that a bit later. I don't have it yet, but I'm going to have it. So there are other examples of this. Here are some examples. On the left, you have family doctors decreasing in percentage from 27% and then to 12%. As you can see, the size of this doctor is supposed to be 27 and this is supposed to be 12. As you can see, it's really not. It's much bigger. It's a much larger drop. So it's kind of distortion. Same thing here, exactly same distortion. Look at 2.4 versus 13. Clearly this barrel versus this barrel, size-wise, there's a distortion. And this distortion is actually more important, especially when you have two dimensions. Just lines is fine, like this, but when you have two dimensions, it makes it hard. So let's measure the lie factor right here on this. So the lie factor is basically the size of effect shown in the graphic. So what percentage increase is shown in the graphic versus the size of the effect in actual data. So in this case, we can actually calculate this. If we look at the graph, it goes from 0.6 inches to 5.3. That is 783% increase versus the actual data is about 53%. So if you divide these two, you'll see that 14.8, this is your lie factor. Now, lie factor is relatively easy to measure. If you have a figure where there are multiple lie factors here, there's a lie factor between this and this as well, this and this as well. So the lie factor in a figure is the largest lie factor you can find. In this case, the largest is between 27.5 and 18. That's what we measure. Okay. What is the biggest lie in this graphic? And that's the lie factor for that graphic. Okay. So we're going to use this, and I will give you an assignment. First assignment will be exactly on this. You're going to use the exact same thing to come up with a lie factor. And then, of course, how to fix it. Now, here is the fix for this specific example. The fix is relatively easy. All you have to do is just make sure that 18 is actually 18 and 27% is 27.5 is only 53% more. And that's exactly what it is. Clearly, there is an increase. The requirements by the Congress has increased, but not as drastic as the previous figure showed. Okay. Now, another example of this is actually by Apple. So this is, as you can see, Apple had this. Steve jobs right there. What is the problem in this? Again, I said already that pie charts are not good, but then three-dimensional pie charts are even worse. Okay, so what's going on here? Look at that size of 19.5 versus 39%. Wow, that 19.5 looks much larger than what it is. If you actually take this chart and fix it, like if you look at this versus, okay, the figure that there, so you can fix it. If you fix it, this is what it looks like. You have to make sure that it's not distorted, it's not three-dimensional. Three-dimensional always, you have to be really careful, especially when you're twisting things. Okay, so here is the real. Actually, this is much better. So pie chart is not good. If you're trying to compare any two companies, this is the best. You can actually see the number, you can see the height. We are very good with length. We are not very good with area. Humans, later on we'll discuss this, we are not really good in terms of looking at the size of things, areas. We cannot compare them very well. When we need precise comparisons, bar chart is the winner. Okay. So here are some more examples. Data variation, not design variation. Here you can see the scale here corrupts the display. So what is going on here? So look at this. So this is 1 year, this is 1 year, this is 1 year. Here you have 1 month, 1 month, 1 month, and 1 month. Okay. So plus you have this three-dimensional effect that also distorts this totally. Okay. So look at the prices. This is 14.5 versus this is just about 9. Look at the size difference. Not only it is just the height is exaggerated, but it's also because of this kind of the three-dimensional view. The perspective is also making it even worse. Okay, so all you need is this actually, right there. So look at this: 1973 to 1878, each dollar was well, for each inch was $8. And October to December, each inch went down to $3.93. Okay, right? So each represents a different number. So now you have more inches shown for the same amount on the graphic. What is an excellence then? So the excellence is we already talked about, so far we talked about integrity. The excellence, on the other hand, is how do I get the same message on my graphic with the minimum number of elements? So shortest time, least ink, and smallest space. So those are three things. If you think about, remember Einstein, explanation should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. So there is this right balance between what is enough, what is too much. There's that balance that you have to find out. And it's not always easy, but it can be done. All right. Now, of course, I want you to read this in your time. What Edward Tufte says is, excellence in visualizations are ones that will actually allow humans to use their capabilities to the full extent. Okay, so there's a lot of verbs here that every day: select, edit, single out, structure, highlight, group, pair, merge, harmonize, skip, smooth, chunk. I'll talk about chunking, average, approximate, cluster, all these things that are very important when we look at data and in visualizations, especially when we're trying to compare things on a visualization, try to get patterns, understand it. So all of these are very important. Okay, so there's so much that we need to look at. So one design principle Edward Tufte mentions is called data ink ratio. So it's total number of ink used in a graphic versus how much of that ink is used to actually represent data. Okay, so we'll talk about things like look at this figure right at the bottom. So you have basically triglyceride level for people at various income groups, and then also males and females. Okay, this graphic is especially when you have this three-dimensional graph, is oftentimes it's too much. It's distortion is one thing, but another thing is just it has too much ink for no practical use. Okay? So the better is this. You could actually achieve it with just 2 dimensions. You can do exactly this. So the data ink ratio, if you look at this figure here, and this looks also very complex. However, this is an excellent, one of the good examples for data ink ratio. This graph here shows for New York City for 1980, it shows the temperature. So that's the top axis. So it shows you the normal low and normal high, and shows how the temperature across these entire year fluctuated. It shows the annual temperature versus 1980 and normal, and at the bottom it shows for each month what the difference was. It also shows you the humidity at the bottom. This is where the humidity is shown, and then here it shows the precipitation, normal and actual. Okay, so here's the temperature, and here is. So overall, this is a great graph because it gives you a lot of things. One thing that later on we'll talk about this graph is about these distortions. There is this checker marks and all that, the texture that we're going to have to deal with. But overall, this provides all kinds of information in a small space. This is really a good data ink ratio overall. Now, here is the issue. So here, this chart has some problems, right? So those vibrations. So what are these vibrations? These are called Moir effects. And if you look at this chart just long enough, I mean, for me it's just 2 seconds because my eyes are really not good, it actually starts distorting. It actually creates this vibration which is annoying, all right? And we have to avoid this. And here are all kinds of Moir effects. So what is best is just use shades of gray and color and label specific areas with words. Don't use these textures. I myself did this. Well, it's written in one of my actually papers. I use these Moir effects, but now that I'm older and wiser, I really see these as just a distraction. Most of the time, gray and shades of gray is just enough, and with labels you can just achieve exactly the same thing with this ink. Now, here's another chart which is like full of junk. This is one of the worst examples. Colors, all kinds of colors are there. There's so much visual elements that just, it's hard to really figure out what's going on here. It's annoying to look at, first of all. It's hard to understand what is going on here. Okay? Now, avoid chart junk. There are certain steps that we're going to go through, and we'll discuss this throughout the semester. One of the things is this graph. Look at this graph. How do I make this graph and remove what we call chart junk? What is chart junk? Chart junk is anything that is not adding to data ink. Any ink that has no value in it is actually chart junk. Here, a couple of things we notice. One is these lines. These grid lines have no value whatsoever. They have to be removed. So right there, remove grid lines. Okay, right, and then remove the color. The background color has really no value whatsoever. Remove that. If you want, you can actually remove, further remove, let me see, what am I removing here? I'm right here, okay. Further remove the lines, but horizontal lines. You can actually have these white lines so that you can do the comparison. This is 5%, 10%. You're basically removing the box around the chart. So minimize it as much as possible. And this is a very good example. I want you to keep this in mind. So here, actually, first the box is removed, and then even the horizontal, the vertical line, this line is also removed. Okay, so that's what happened here. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so this is a very nice example to keep in mind later on when we do our graphics, and these are the very simple process. Nonetheless, we'll just be able to get most efficient charts ever. Well, what is the harm of chart junk? Well, you may say, okay, this is cool. Why don't I add things? Look at this graph. This is the same graph that we had earlier about fuel efficiency of fuel standards. And now all the chart junk. This is basically this whole thing around it is the junk. Okay, that's chart junk. Okay. So what does happen? Well, of course, charging allows you to persuade people, makes your visualizations memorable, and it engages people. It's cool, but at the same time, it's unbiased, right? So it really doesn't add value. It actually creates all kinds of problems for your chart to be allowing good analysis. It makes it really lie. It makes it hard to interpret, takes a lot of space, it's not very efficient. So overall, there are all kinds of cons for charging. We are going to avoid it as much as we can. Now, another element. So these are so we have achieved graphical excellence. We have also achieved integrity. So no, don't lie, and then remove all the chart junk. How do you then increase the data ink? One of the ways you can increase the data ink is basically include elements that are multifunctioning. So here, graphical elements that will help you in terms of this, conveying multiple information at the same time. So one of those is basically, this is called the stem and leaf display. So here's the name, stem and leaf display. This was invented by, as far as I remember, Tufte, who is a statistician from Princeton. He invented these. So what happens here is basically it shows you a distribution of numbers, right? So 0-9, so this means 900 feet, okay? 1-9 means 1900 feet, okay? So you basically, in this graph, you look at the measures of something, I don't remember what it was. Basically, this shows the distribution. So if you take this, right, and turn it sideways, what you have is a histogram, okay? So this was early ways of creating histograms, okay? So you go to your data set, and these are all the numbers in your data set. Basically, you have this. I think these are the heights of mountains, as far as I remember. So this was 900, there was one number 900, there was one 800, there was one 700, there was two 600s, okay? One 500, there was another 600, there was another 200, okay? So these were basically all the numbers. One by one you write. This basically goes, these numbers go into that first bucket. There was one 900, there was one 700, one 700. So they go like this. These actually go to this bucket right here, second, right? So second bin, okay? If you turn it sideways, that's second bin, okay? So, right? So that's the idea. So here you also show each element, each individual number, but also show the distribution. Here is your distribution. You can actually show that this is my distribution, okay? Again, it's sideways, but it works exactly the same way. All right. So here's another multi-functional element. This is basically a very nice histogram. This is basically height. This is the tallest guys on the left, and shortest are on the left and right. You can actually see how the heights distribution is, okay? You see the histogram, but you also see the people, each individual element there as well, okay? So these are very important. Seeing it in individual element as well as the distribution. We'll talk about this when we build our graphics later. So how do we maximize data density? The number of elements in the data plus divided by the area of the graphic. So how do we do this? We can shrink the graphics. So we can actually have like what do we call small multiples, okay? I think I'm small multiples. We can actually shorten this. One other way to do this is most recently we do using spark lines, and they're used a lot. These are spark lines, and it can show you not only the current situation, but almost like in the writing, they're part of the writing. You can actually see the entire last 65 months, 12 months, how this specific, foreign exchange rate has changed, okay? Dollars versus euro, yen versus dollar, and so on, okay? So we call these spark lines, okay? Here are some examples. In your writing, actually, you can almost treat it as a writing, but at the same time, give the overall picture in one snapshot. Small multiples, repeat visually similar elements and nearby rather than spreading apart. Here are some examples of small multiples. In the one case is actually various kinds of different trains. When you look at the trains, how they look from the forward, and also I think from the forward end of all these trains. Look at the colors change, and then the green and red, they change, and they're sometimes not there, so that changes basically how the trains look. Okay, so this graph is actually showing all kinds of trains, and each one is actually a different train. So this is Hoboken-Hudson term, but it's an express train, local train. Looking at the colors, the person who's guiding the trains will know which train is coming, just looking at these colors. On the right side, you have again small multiples. There are multiple repeating figures. Instead of putting all, this is basically a skin cancer. This is the melanoma, showing where it appears on the face. So the top one is man, top one is all. The bottom one is man and ladies. This is female. This is in German. This is male, and this is, I think this is total. Okay, summation of. So you can actually see where melanoma occurs in women and men differently, if there is any difference, and then you see the total. Okay. All right. So these are small multiples that allow repeating these visually similar figures, but at the same time you can also see these minor differences very quickly. Instead of having 10 different figures like this in each page, you can have them all one at a time in the same page. Here are some examples of, I think these, as far as I remember, these were car efficiency. This is from, I think, Consumer Reports. So the colors here mean starting from, I think, let me look at this right here. So the white means much better than average, black means much worse than average. Now you look at these different cars and you look at it in various aspects, like for instance, each of air conditioning, body exterior, engine cooling, how is it compared to the rest of the cars. You can see if the car has a lot of blacks across the years, you know that that car is bad. If over the time it changes, you can immediately see. So this is very, very useful, and you know that I think this is Consumer Reports that's using this. Okay, very useful. All right. Now, sometimes we overestimate what humans can process and create visualizations that are really, really demanding on our kind of audience. So it could be anyone. So you got to remember, don't overestimate what they can process in a given time. What is their breadth? Don't overestimate their, they will focus on everything that you see. Whatever you see, don't assume that they're going to see all of that. Finally, the depth. They were not going to see deep. They were not going to focus on something that you see on one part of the page, unless you show them and point them to them using annotations, using arrows, maybe using highlights. I will talk about all this as well. So you're going to guide your users to understand which part of visualization they should focus. You cannot assume they're just going to handle this on their own. One other thing is escape the flatland. Oftentimes multivariate data doesn't require 3D projections. You can actually handle it with 2 dimensions. Here is a Japanese 2-dimensional weather report. It shows a lot of things. Here you have a bunch of cities, I think, right here, your cities. And it shows you a lot of things. The winds are shown here, the mountains, ranges, temperatures on the shown. Here's the wind speed, and how is the weather is going to be that day. It's all of that is shown in one figure, and this is just 2-dimensional data, but it's excellent in terms of multi-dimensional representation of data. Show mechanism, process, and dynamics and causality. So guide your users when you have a visualization. Don't show just the final figure, but show them step by step what they focus. Here's an example of why a Potomac River is so dangerous. Step by step, it shows you what happens to an individual if they happen to fall into this river. Okay, look at this carefully. I don't want to talk about it too much. So sometimes layer and separate. So here is an excellent example. This is, I think, is some kind of an equipment, mechanical thing, and you often see these in parts catalogs, for instance. I have a motorcycle and I like BMWs, and when I order parts, actually I look at a chart like this and pick a part, then I order it. Okay. So layering is very important. Here, as you can see, the whole thing is taken and layers are prevented, and this is very common. Narratives. Tell the story. Here is a story of I think this is the some kind of a bug. It's life cycle of this bug. You know, it starts from the left in January and all the way to December. It goes back. So it's how actually. So the whole thing is just a story, right? We don't show it one thing, but we show it across time. Okay? And you have to remember this. We'll talk about narratives quite a bit when we get to storytelling, and there we'll talk about various aspects of this. Summary. Design principles: maximize data ink, escape flat length. So we talk about what to do for data ink ratio. How do we increase it? Avoid the junk. Use multi-functional elements. Maximize density. Show mechanism process. To escape the flat length, where the chart actually doesn't add any more value to what you're saying, enable macro-micro evidence, layer, use small multiples, and use narratives for space and time to show it. Okay, so make it more understandable. That's the idea. Okay. All right, we showed this example. I think I'm gonna skip. Here is the process I talked about earlier, and the process was basically how do I end up with this. Here, actually, this is the process. I started with this stage. In the first step, what I did was basically I had created this, and this is what Tableau gives me just from the get-go. And then I basically decided that I really don't need these. I don't know, it's hard to see, but if you look at the slides on your own computer, you see that there are grid lines. I removed the grid lines. Then I go ahead and remove axis, X and Y. I don't need that. I remove that as well. And I then put boxes around and say, okay, those boxes are not useful. Remove those as well. And then I go ahead and remove everything, and the only thing I have is just Y1, Y2, Y3, and Y4. And I know that this is again to X, so I have the domain knowledge a little bit. So I don't really have X1, X2, and X3, and X4, okay? Or, sorry. All right, it's like this, okay? Don't need this, okay? I know the context. Of course, you can always add them back. It's up to you, but this is just the process, how I go through this process and end up with this. All right, this wraps up our theory of visualization, and we're going to use these very simple, but nonetheless sometimes it's very hard to notice that you're actually violating these principles, and we're going to, throughout the semester, we'll actually focus on this. All right, I'm stopping here now. I'll see you next time and next video. Take care.